Welcome to the Awaken Heart podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Awaken Heart podcast. This is going to be a really great episode focusing on relationships and how we communicate and interact with each other. And this is a very often controversial way of looking at this, that men are actually afraid of women. Today, we will explore all of this and unpack of what this actually means and how we can use this to enhance our own relationships for the better. In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Avrum Weiss, the award-winning author of the best-selling book, Hidden in Plain Sight: How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. It might sound surprising at first, men being afraid of women, but Avrum's work shines a powerful light on how those fears show up in ways many of us just don't recognize. Whether it's the fear of being controlled, the fear of emotions, or the fear of inadequacy and abandonment. These internal dynamics can quietly shape how men show up in relationships. This conversation goes deep. We talk about how boys are socialized to suppress their emotional worlds, why emotional safety is often missing for men, and how that disconnect can lead to breakdowns in intimacy and understanding. Avrum brings incredible wisdom and gentleness to a topic that touches so many of us, whether we're men navigating our own emotional terrain or women trying to understand the men in our lives. I think you'll walk away from this one with a deeper sense of empathy and some truly powerful insights. Hi, Avrum. Welcome to the Awaken Heart podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And I'm really excited about this topic because I know a lot of women, especially in the dating era, are going through a lot of what you talk about in your recent book, Hidden in Plain Sight. I think a lot of women have I think it's a little harder now, especially with the age of the app and the swiping and how everything becomes so easy. And I think a lot of men are taught growing up, I think it's even harder now with the way they're raised with the media and instant access to women and what they see maybe on the sites or some of these movies or these porn sites and such, how women they think should be treated, or how they're raised about how, like, emotionally you've got to be strong, you don't show your emotions, and you have to be the tough guy. And so it's really making dating and relationships, even being in relationships, hard. And I just really I think my audience and myself included, because I've mentioned I've been single for a very long time. I'm just not willing to deal with the lack of connection I'm feeling from a lot of emotional intelligence I'm feeling from most men, especially around my age. I think a lot of men get confused when they're dating younger girls, because I think it's a completely different generation of what they expect from a man as what a woman my age expects from a man and how I want to be treated. So, in your book, Hidden in Plain Sight, explores something that's often overlooked and misunderstood: men's fear of women. What inspired you to write about this topic? And let's go again into your background about maybe where you were before you decided to tackle this topic of, like, the emotional availability of men and how it conflicts with women and deepening relationships.
I'm going to go back to something you said a few minutes ago.
Yes.
I was with you all the way, but there's one piece I would change slightly.
Yes.
That
Okay.
they're confused because of how they think women want to be, how they're taught to treat women.
Mm-hmm.
I think a slightly more accurate version of that would be they're confused because of how they think women want to be
Yes,
treated.
exactly. Thank you for clarifying that.
So it's very confusing to
Mm-hmm.
men
Yes.
because it's confusing to you. So men have a hard time figuring out what's appropriate, as you point out, in this day and age, because everything's changed, and I do mean everything.
Mhm.
Everything's changed, and they can't figure out what you want.
Mhm. I
So
agree.
if you read social media, you get one picture that women want men who are sensitive, vulnerable, kind, open hearted, right? You with me?
Mhm.
But if you go to the grocery store and you pick up the little romance novel at the end cap there, you get a very different picture. And in the publishing world, those books are known as bodice rippers.
Yes.
So when you move over here into women's erotica, you find an entirely different picture. Women who want to be taken, who want to be convinced,
Yes,
who
so
want to have
confusing.
someone release their inner inhibitions. So men see both these realities. It's very confusing. And so you got that mess. And then you add to that that men are socialized to believe that, first of all, masculinity is defined not proactively but reactively. That masculinity in our culture means not feminine. There is no aspirational set of values for masculinity. It's not something you can achieve, it's something you can lose. So women don't spend a lot of time worrying about, am I a woman? Men spend a lot of time worrying about whether they are seen as masculine. And taking care of women and pleasing women is one of the biggest factors in being masculine. So here's this thing you need to do, but you can't figure out how the hell to do it. And so it is a mess. You're absolutely right.
Mhm. So, what inspired you to write about this topic?
I was hoping you'd forget you asked me that. Uh, so the honest answer to that question from any writer is because it's about me. People
Mhm,
lie about that all the time and they make up stories about why they get interested in stuff, but that's all a lie. The truth is always people write about things that are relevant to their own lives.
mhm.
And so I wrote this book. I guess I started writing it, I don't know, some years after a divorce. And I realized um, how much of the problems in my marriage had to do with my unrecognized fears of my wife. And talk a lot about that in the book. But basically, there are a series of fears that men have in women, starting with the more conscious, readily recognizable ones, like men are afraid of being dominated and controlled by women. How do you know men are afraid of that? Because they insist all the time that they're not. And as Shakespeare said, the lady doth protest to her. In this case, the gentleman doth protest to her. People don't insist things are true unless they're not. And so the original title of the book, which the publisher wisely rejected, was Pussy Whipped. So,
Hey, that would've garnered some attention.
well, it would have gotten definitely attention
Definitely.
because I'm fascinated by that the worst thing one man can say to another man is that you're controlled by a woman. And if you think about it, go another level deeper, it's not just controlled by a woman, it's controlled in a particular way, controlled by your need for a woman. Pussy whipped means you've lost your independence because you need a woman for sex, is what it means. And
Yes.
so needing a woman is the real sin there.
Makes sense. And you wisely changed the name of your book.
I didn't, the publisher did.
Yes, and because it's something that your women readers that would turn off a lot of women readers. So, I'm sure a lot of women read your book to understand.
Surprisingly to me, on Amazon, you can see, is it Amazon or I've forgotten where I got this
Mhm.
information, but it's like 52-48 women to men. There's slightly, even though my topic is clearly about men.
Yes. We wanna understand.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
probably on more podcasts hosted by women than men.
Yes, and the statistics, like, as far as spiritual development and any spiritual retreats or awareness, it's more women than men
Absolutely.
that seek out, like, the self-development, self-help.
Although I'd like to think that's changing. I've been seeing men in psychotherapy for decades and more, it
They're
used to
willing
be
to.
men came to therapy because their wives or girlfriends said, either you go to therapy or we're done. more and more I'm getting men coming saying, my life is not everything I'd like it to be, or I don't feel close to my children, or, you know, for their own reasons,
Mhm.
which I think is
Can Yeah, and hopefully some of them are that women just aren't the catalyst and they're seeking it out
great.
themselves. So
Yeah.
are you seeing more and more of that?
Yes, I am. And there's a great misunderstanding about men, which
Mhm.
I was equally as guilty of as anybody else, which is that men are seen pejoratively as sort of emotionally learning disabled. Like men need special ed for relationships. And I'm happy to say that's not true. It is true that men tend to be less experienced in relationships than women, which I'm happy to go into if you want to.
Mhm.
But men are just as eager as we think of women as hungry for connection and relationship and intimacy. That's not true. Men are just as interested
Yep.
in we're human beings. We share far more alike than separate us. And men have carried this horrible wound for most of their lives. So when I said to you that warmth and intimacy are not considered masculine, that creates an incredible bind for men
Mhm.
because they have to choose between being seen as masculine, which means privilege and power in the world, or letting other people know that they care about closeness and intimacy and vulnerability. Can't have them both. Hopefully that's changing, but that's how
Mhm.
men perceive it, that it's a forced choice.
So you're either strong and nothing affects you, or you're like this pussy,
Yeah,
which people call where you're showing your emotions and
exactly.
you can tap into it, or you might be overly feminine, but there's a combination of the two. You need both of that masculinity and femininity. And I think because we talk a lot about now the divine masculine and divine feminine and an integration of the two to become a whole, I feel it might be becoming more public, or more people are aware of having these two dynamics to be a
Well,
whole
men
individual.
are certainly changing, thank God. And men changing means life's going to change for heterosexual women, at least.
Mhm.
Um, I will never forget the day. This is a long time ago, but I never forget the day that I went. I'm almost tearful remembering it. I went to a McDonald's bathroom, and for the first time, there was a changing table in a McDonald's men's room. Now, I'd been changing
Oh, that
my
makes
kids'
sense.
diapers on nasty public restroom sinks for years because nobody thought that there was a need for a diaper changing
That
table.
makes so
And
much
why
sense.
would you put with one there?
Yeah.
Because men didn't change diapers. Well, men do change diapers and raise kids and all those things. And I literally burst into tears the first time I saw it changing it.
Mhm.
I'm seen, I'm recognized. I'm not an oddity. I'm not there's nothing wrong with me because I have my child with me.
Wow, I never thought about that. I never thought about that. Having so many men are taking care of their kids, even if they're in a relationship with their wife or girlfriend and they're raising their child together. I never thought about that, having changing tables in a men's bathroom, because they're going to be out on excursions with their
Yeah.
kids as well.
Men
Makes
are taking
sense.
care of kids, and not just because you want us to.
Right.
Men are taking care of kids because we've discovered how rewarding it is,
Mm.
how much better it feels. So one of the smart ass questions I sometimes ask men when I'm first getting to know them is when they're telling me, how close they are with their kids. I'll say, really, what color eyes are your children? And they often don't know.
Oh.
And to me, that's not something that makes me angry. It's something that makes me terribly sad.
Mhm.
Because not only are they not very close to their children, they sort of don't even know that there's more close they could be. They're not even really aware that they're not that close, that they have kind of a transactional relationship with their children. And so one of the things I'm proudest of is I look around my practice and I see guys whose degree of involvement as fathers is unrecognizable from when they started to work with me. They are very involved with their kids now, and not just in a dutiful way, but like you couldn't pry them off their kids. Love their kids. They're
Mhm.
devoted to their kids, and they're so much happier.
Mhm. So, your work as a therapist, how did that lead you to uncover a lot of these emotional patterns in men?
I was incredibly fortunate very early in my career. I went to a 2-year master's program that was in the middle of nowhere, and it was a very intensive training experience. far more intensive than my doctoral program. And we learned an approach to psychology, an approach to listening that involved, like, if you would study a topic, you would interview people about the topic and then sit and analyze the transcript, spending, hours on 2 or 3 paragraphs of spoken language. So I learned this incredible ability to listen in a way that is like layers and layers deeper than social listening. So whenever I get the question, how did you get into this? I facetiously want to ask back, how is not everybody into this? Because after this interview, I promise you and everyone listening, you're going to see men's fears of women everywhere.
Mm.
Once you understand what's going on, you can't not see it. And so I was seeing a lot of men in my practice, and they were all talking about the same stuff. And they were talking about what sounded to me like how scared they were of their partner. And the form it would take is they would tell me all the things they were unhappy about in their relationship. And I would naively say, well, if you talk to your partner, wife, girlfriend about this, and they'd look at me like I had 2 heads, like, no, I can't talk with her about this. And it gradually dawned on me that they were afraid to talk to her. So I started checking it out with them. And I would say carefully, because you say to a man he's afraid of a woman, it doesn't always go well. I said, it sounds like maybe you're afraid to talk to her. And the response was the same every time. First, they get defensive and blow up and be offended, but it never lasted 60 seconds.
Mm.
I'm telling you that every single time when you put this idea in front of a man, within 60 seconds, they go, that would make a lot of sense. And then we start going back through the same material through this lens, and things that didn't make sense start to make sense. It just changes. If you sit with a couple and you're thinking about this, you just see them entirely differently.
Mhm. So it probably surprises some listeners to hear that many men fear women. Can you break down that idea for us? And what kind of fear are we really talking about?
Sure. If you allow a sort of tangential lead up to that
Mhm.
question, because it's an important question. So there's an old social psychology experiment, I think from the 70s, called the hidden face experiment. You can either Google, I'm sorry, still face. Hidden is the book, still is the experiment. If you Google still face experiment, you'll see it. And in this experiment, they have a split screen with a mother and an infant. And you can see there's a conversation going on back and forth. They're learning about each other. When the baby makes a face and the mom smiles, the baby knows, oh, that face works. That's a cute face. Mom likes that. You can see they're going back and forth. Then in the experiment, the mom is instructed to turn away and turn back with a still face,
I think I've seen
not an
that.
angry face, not a critical face,
Oh, I've
just
seen that.
okay. And what happens?
The
The
baby
baby
is, like, confused.
lose it
Mhm.
entirely. Some babies lost control of bowel and bladder and couldn't sit
Wow.
up straight. They were so distressed because human infants are 100% dependent on their caretakers. They can't
Mhm.
even feed themselves. So human infants are hyper alert. It is our survival depends on pleasing our caretaker so that they will take care of us. Because if we are a pain in the ass as an infant, we risk death. So we learn to watch women very carefully, because most caretakers are women, to see if we're okay with them, because our lives depend on it. Fast forward to adulthood, and you get into the emotionally charged atmosphere of a romantic relationship. It's just the same for men. They're scanning very carefully to see if they are okay with the woman that they now need to approve of them. So, for example, I had one man tell me that he could tell if his wife was upset with him the minute he walked in the door. What he meant is, before he saw her, that he could feel in the air
Mm.
whether or not, and because his whole relationship had been carefully sensitizing himself to recognize any sign of disapproval, he actually got so good at it, he could feel it in the air. And I think he was telling the truth.
Yeah. Yep.
So it starts there. And men carry that into their adult relationships with women. Is one of the simplest ways you know the truth of this is, I'm sure when a heterosexual couple breaks up, who starts dating again sooner?
Men.
So if men don't need women, how come they're the ones that start dating
Exactly.
again so fast,
Yes.
right? And they remarry quicker because it's disowned dependency. It's having needs just as great as a woman's, but not being really socially allowed to acknowledge that. So they live kind of a split life.
Mhm. So breaking it down, it's just they have such a need and it stems from childhood with the reactions of watching their mother and being dependent on their mother and watching for reactions of disapproval or approval.
Mhm.
And so that they do need women. And that's the fear is not having the woman or being not having the approval of a woman.
One could argue
Mhm.
this will not be a popular position. Can't wait to hear the email after this. One could argue that men need women more than women need men
I can see that.
because women tend to have more well developed social networks,
Mhm.
and not just superficial social, but deep, close, connected social networks. So the reason men run out and start dating right away is they have no friends. They have nobody else to talk to, nobody else to spend time with, nobody else to feel good about themselves with. And so they have to start dating right away
Mhm.
because they don't have the kind of scaffolding in place to support them without it.
Yeah, because women have each other and we share everything with each other. We rely on each other for our emotions and support, and anything we're going through, we bounce off our girlfriends. So I think some men nowadays are having those type of relationships with other guys. They don't have to be all
Absolutely.
bro.
And men are no different from women.
Mhm.
If you look at the science on gender differences, 99 plus percent of the differences between men and women are learned, not innate.
Mhm.
It's like the research on racial difference. If you look at the level of DNA, people from different races have 99.6 something the same. It's very little that separates.
Right.
Men and women are the same way. We've convinced we have this crap about men are from Mars and women from Venus. It's all learned. It's all socialized.
Since you brought that up, what is your take on men are from Mars and women are from Venus? If you've said it's
One of the
not that
worst books
different.
I've ever read in my life.
It's what?
It's one of the worst books. I actually listened to it. I'll
Interesting.
just tell
Good.
you how long ago on cassette, and I literally threw the cassette out the window
Ah!
because he could just keep saying again and again and again, like he invented everything, like he
Mhm.
discovered it. And it's just a pet peeve of mine. I don't think, even though I'm the first author to write about this stuff in 100 years, I don't think I discovered anything. I think I was just paying a little more attention and noticed something that was obviously already there. And if you go back 125 years ago, Freud was writing about it. So I didn't discover it. I just was paying enough attention to notice it.
Mhm.
You will too. Starting today, you will start seeing this. Anytime you're around men and women together, you'll see it.
It's interesting to be able to be in a room and watch people and their dynamics together. You can always tell sometimes when it's a first date, or I used to play this game with somebody I was in a relationship with before. He would watch people and we just kind of like, you know, integrate what their conversation is talking about, or like you can see when someone's just meeting someone and they haven't even met in person before. So
Yep.
that's going to be fun to
Yep.
watch people. But you've written about core fears men tend to carry into relationships: fear of being controlled, fear of women's emotions, fear of inadequacy, and fear of abandonment. Can we go through each one and talk about how they typically show up?
Sure. There are a lot of them. So let's just hit the highlights.
Okay.
I'll just go to the ones you mentioned. So we talked about fear of being controlled because men are taught that they need to be in charge. They worry that they are just what we were just talking about, unowned dependency. They worry that they will be controlled by women. So one of the scenarios that I use to help people identify what these fears are like is I'll say to a group of men, you're at work and a group of your friends say, hey man, we're going to go to the game. We're going to go see the game afterwards. We're going to have some beers and go see the game. You want to join us? If you ask a man his first reaction to that question, 9 times out of 10, do you know what the first thought man would have?
I have to check with my
Yep.
girlfriend.
Right.
or my wife. Mhm.
The sad part about that is that the girlfriend of the wife is over here going, "Oh, please God, go out with your friends. I'm asking you all the time to go out with you." So it's not coming from her most of the time. It's his own insecurity about if he displeases her, how's that gonna go? So that's just a very everyday way to recognize
Mhm.
that fear. The other one you mentioned was another one you mentioned was fear of emotions. And it's really the misnomer is so in many arguments in heterosexual couples, men often try to lower the emotional tone of the argument. And they're critical of women for being too emotional and push them to be more rational and more linear. That's not out of, I think that's misunderstood. People imagine that that's about power and control and domination. It's about terror. It's because emotions are contagious. And if you are with someone who's anxious, you start to feel anxious. If you're with someone who's sad, unless you're a sociopath, you start to feel sad. And so what's happening is men are getting emotionally stimulated by their intimate conversation with somebody who is emotional, and they don't know what to do with those feelings. So since they don't know how to manage them in themselves, they try to get you to be less emotional.
Mm.
They will be less stimulated.
Mhm. That's interesting because when they tell us to be less emotional, it's just gonna put gasoline onto the fire, like, "What do you
Exactly what
mean?"
happens.
Yeah.
And that is your classic argument in a heterosexual relationship is she makes an approach trying to make a connection. He hears it as
Mhm.
critical, and so he withdraws. She's getting the opposite of what she wants, so she gets more emotional. He gets more scared and withdraws more. She gets more emotional. He withdraws more, and then we're in a standoff. And what's missing is if the woman understands that the man is backing off not to be a jerk, but because he's scared, then she can soften her approach, and it's very possible that he may then feel less scared and move more. Then they start moving more towards each other. The Gottmans, who are the primary researchers in couples, talk about a slow startup. Their data shows that you can predict how an argument's going to go by what happens in the first, I think it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
Mhm.
And if it ramps up quickly in the first 2 or 3 minutes, it's going to go badly.
Yeah.
If it starts slower and the women give room for the men to sort of find their footing, it goes better.
So, to dissipate that typical dynamic about you're being so emotional or stop it because they're afraid of those feelings that they're feeling because
Yes.
they can feel those emotions. How can that situation be diffused and how can women support their partners in becoming more emotionally aware or vulnerable without triggering these deeper fears and the spiraling of the argument?
Great question. I think there are things women can do and things men can do. And I always try for there to be, things for both sides to work on so that one person doesn't think I'm blaming them. But for men to work on is to recognize when they're starting to withdraw and get scared and to say, whoa, 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 slow it down. I need some time. And the analogy that I always use with people, which they understand immediately, is sex. I say, if the two of you are sexually active, you've had to learn about pacing with each other.
Mhm.
You have different pacing for arousal, climax. And apparently you've figured that out because you've been having sex together all these years. You must have figured out something about how to pay attention to both your emotional pacing and your partner's and figure out something that works. I said it's the same in arguments, the same in emotion. For the men, it's a question of noticing when they're getting overwhelmed and scared and asking their partner to take it slower. And for the women, it's anticipating that when he starts to withdraw and dig in his heels, it's not because he's being a jerk, it's because he's scared. And if you tamp it down some, if you lower the level, if you're less emotional for a little bit until he catches up, then you can have a simultaneous orgasm.
Mm.
Emotion.
Yes, emotionally. That
Yes.
makes okay. So related to, like, I can see that sexual yes, pay more
It's like
attention.
not
So okay, so they just need to back off a little bit, women, and take a breath. Maybe take a breath and then approach it a little softer for whatever the situation is. And men begin to recognize and work through the hidden fears.
yeah,
So But for what about for a man? Well, I mean, women could be unaware of this as well. Men are unaware that they're acting like this, and they're going through their same old patterns of reaction, and he's backing off, and she's overly emotional, and he's telling her not to be, and he's insensitive. So a couple that might be unaware of these patterns, how can you suggest to somebody that's totally unaware of this, that's listening, the first steps to dissipating the misunderstandings?
When women understand that what's going on with men is that they're afraid, just understanding that is a game changing
Mhm.
press, because they tend to then leave more room. And rather than continuing to pursue, which is their inclination,
Yes.
they slow the pace down, and it leaves more room for the men to catch up and be more connected with them.
Mhm.
So it just that awareness is tremendously helpful.
So awareness is key.
Yeah, that's the
Mhm.
starting place.
Yes. So how do these fears play out in everyday interactions, especially in long-term partnerships or marriages?
Well, they play out in just the way we're talking about how
Mhm.
arguments go. Couples end up polarized in positions, and neither one of them are really in a position that they want. So it's easy for, if you ask women, are men as interested, is your partner as interested in being close as you are? They will probably say no, but it's probably not true. So that men's desire for connection and closeness tends to get lost in many relationships. But if you understand these ideas and then you start with a different assumption, which is that he is as interested in being, we're on the same team here. We both want the same thing. We're just not understanding each other. So then instead of a conflict, it can become a collaboration. Like, okay, we're trying to do the same thing here. What are we not understanding that's getting in the way?
Mhm.
The hallmark of a great argument, in my experience, is you get to the end of the argument and you go, wait, that's what you were thinking?
Mhm.
That's what
Yes.
real? Because
Why
when
did you
you
say
finally
so?
get it, right, she did, 10 times, you couldn't hear
Mhm.
it, or he did. But that's a great argument when you finally like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
get where you were coming from,"
Mhm.
then you really learn something.
Mhm. And it's a relief when you come to like, "Oh my
Huge,
god."
huge. Yeah, yes, and again, and women are not so different. We're raised very differently. So we
Mhm.
have very different experiences, but at core, we are much more alike than not.
Mhm. Well, besides, like, he doesn't care, he doesn't listen to me, I'm the one that's doing more in this relationship that he is, I'm more vested. What are some common misunderstandings women might have when they're on the receiving end of this fear-driven behavior?
The most common one is he's not interested. Actually, let me read you. This is
Okay.
a quote from a woman who attended a workshop I do with couples about what men and women don't understand with each other. After the workshop, she wrote, I understand that my husband has not been ignoring, dismissing, or hurting me out of a lack of respect, as I suspected, but that he's scared. Scared to hurt me, scared to mess up with me, scared to not be enough. I had honestly never imagined that he was scared and that I was so profoundly important to him that he was constantly terrified I would leave him.
Mm,
It changed everything in their marriage
mhm,
because she went from, and admittedly, by her own admission, a very angry, critical person to a compassionate person, because understanding, it's like when your kid's misbehaving and then you see that they're scared or something, you're not mad at them anymore. I don't mean to imply men are children, but it's just to try to find the experience of when you understand where someone's coming from, it tends to diminish your irritation.
mm. So, like the reaction you had from that earlier man in your practice, where you're like, oh, you're scared, and he reacted, and then it diminished within 60 seconds.
Yeah.
So, a woman, how they approaches it by going softer and recognizing that he's scared is just instead of her saying, well, you're afraid, and him being reactive, it's just her the way she approaches it and the way she
Absolutely.
understands it and having the awareness is going to
Yeah.
help
I
him.
mean, what a lot of couples have told me, and I think it's just a brilliant thing to do, is that they're reading the book together, chapter by chapter.
Mhm.
So they just read the first chapter and then they make a time to talk about it. Then they read the second chapter and they make a time to talk about it. And what happens is that the men are pointing at the book and saying, "That's me. That's what I've been trying to tell you. That's what it's like for me." And the women are like you said before, why didn't you tell? Like,
Mhm.
this is what I've wanted to know about you all along. And so it's eye opening for women and a tremendous relief for men to feel known for who they are.
Mhm. And it's not even just the fear of, like, disappointing a woman or letting them down or hurting the woman. It's they're feeling these emotions that they're, like, taught not to feel, and they're being affected by sadness or they're maybe it's some shame or whatever it is, and you're not supposed to feel these feelings because you're supposed to be a strong man, and masculinity isn't about feeling these emotions, so I don't even know how to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And a lifetime of conditioning.
Mhm. Gosh. So, what does emotional literacy and inner work play in healing, and how does it play in healing these dynamics?
It's what it's all about for men. It's about becoming comfortable with themselves as a person with emotions and dependency and interpersonal needs for interpersonal connection. In my experience, men embrace these things. In my experience, men are often terribly lonely. I write for Psychology Today, and I wrote an article on men and loneliness that had 1 million views.
Wow.
It was just an article out of it. I didn't know. I didn't have any idea that it was going to, but it was like 1 million people read this article, and that moved me because I thought this is because we don't recognize how lonely men because they're so good at hiding it. Thus, the title, "Hidden in Plain Sight." They're so good at hiding it and compensating that you really have to get just below the surface, and it's terribly sad how lonely.
Mhm. Now, you've mentioned that a lot of this is learned behavior. How much of this emotional patterning, how much of it is shaped by our culture, and how much how they are raised?
99 point something percent of it is shaped by, we have
Mhm.
data that parents respond differently to boys and girls based on their gender as young as 4 months old. So even parents who are really doing their damnedest to raise gender neutral children end up responding differently to children. So there's a congresswoman from California whose name is Judy Chu. She's a psychologist and a congresswoman. And she wrote a book called When Boys Become Boys about this socialization. And she spent, I think, 3 years hanging out in a pre K kindergarten class with the boys day after day after day. So she spent hundreds of hours trying to learn what it's like for these boys as they encounter this socialization. And she tells this story, which is heartbreaking. At the end of the year, the teacher says every kid can lead the class in their favorite song we learned this year. And a sweet little boy stands up in front of the class and starts singing a lullaby.
That's
What do you
sweet.
think the other boys did in the
Made
class?
fun of him.
That's right, they made fun of him. He stops and says, "I was just kidding. I don't like that song." And then starts singing the Marine Corps anthem.
Mhm.
Now, the lullaby was his favorite song. But you
Oh,
can see exactly. You can see right there him being socialized,
conditioned, yep.
that part of himself, and put on a false veneer of tough guy Marine in order not to be humiliated by his friend.
That's so interesting because it's learned at as from 4 months old, like,
Yeah,
you can't play with babies or I mean, my nephew played with a baby. He was a boy, but he played with a baby until he was 2 years old, and he's a man nowadays. We just let him. Doesn't also mean what's happening nowadays that you have to, chemically castrate a boy or or change their gender or call him a different gender. But how do you think
but hang on one second.
Yeah.
Think about your story. Hear the fear in that story. Why do we get uncomfortable letting boys play with dolls?
Mhm. Because
Because
it's
we're
mhm.
scared that they won't grow up to be men. So we're scared that their masculinity is so fragile
Right.
that they won't be men if we let them play
Oh,
with
we had no problem with
that
him playing
based
with
on fear.
Mhm. We had no problem playing with it. It was adorable. We just let him be a kid. But others would be like, "Oh, he's playing with a doll. Let's, change their." There's a lot of confusion out there as what's happening nowadays. But we had no problems letting them play. Like, let kids be kids. Let them play, let them experiment, let them, identify with however they want to identify. Let them be kids. Leave them alone. So,
Well,
what do you think if they were raised just to be, I'm Tom, she's Sheila, he's Harry, just to, as individualized human beings? How would that look?
well, it would be I don't feel like I can say for women, but I can say for men. It would
Mhm.
that'd be a hell of a lot less painful. There's the colleague of mine who wrote the introduction for the book. He and his colleagues have done over 200 studies on what he calls gender role conflict. Gender role conflict is the gap between who you see yourself as a man and who you think you're expected to be as a man. And the greater that gap, the more gender role conflict. So, gender role conflict, people who have high gender role conflict, is correlated with loneliness, sadness, anxiety, depression, heart disease, gastrointestinal problems, divorce, violence, a list of dozens and dozens and dozens of problems that all come from this conflict that men carry between who they are. So if you reduce that conflict and men felt more comfortable being themselves and less worried about being judged as feminine, men's mental health would improve. Maybe we'd live as long as
Mhm.
because I think that's a
Yeah,
lot
the
of
pressure.
why men don't live as long at that
Mm,
end. And because we're supposed to be Superman, we don't go to the doctor.
mhm. Well, I know you've mentioned that things are changing nowadays where you're seeing more men come into your therapy practice and you're seeing a lot of more awareness in the men. But are you really seeing generational shifts? Are younger men starting to relate to emotional vulnerability differently than previous
I think
generations?
they are. I don't think it's just if it were just what I was seeing in my office, I wouldn't
Mhm.
think so. But I mean, for example, my son has twins, son and daughter
Mhm.
twins, and about to have another baby in 10 days. And when I go visit them, we get together with their friends who all have children, little children. When a child cries, it's the dads who get up to go
Mhm.
99% of the time, and every time I see it, my heart is just touched. The moms are doing what dads used to do, which is they're sitting drinking their wine and
That's
relaxing and
nice.
enjoying it. They're not even worried because they know the dads, they have complete you can tell this is not the first time the dads are doing this, that this is a pattern. The moms don't even interrupt their conversation. They know the dad's got it, and the dads clearly have done this before. Those are the moments that I feel most hopeful about the world
Mhm.
when I see that.
Yeah, because if you look at watch old shows, like maybe it's in the 50s or 60s, like the Mad Men era, you wouldn't see that. You would see them.
I'm saying to you, as recently as the 80s, there were
Yeah.
changing tables in men's rooms.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
just ancient history. It's we
Well, even longer than that, the 2000s, you're just seeing changing tables. Yeah.
right. So
Wonderful.
we have a long way to go, but
Yes.
I think, look, I get a lot of grief for this book,
Mhm.
and mostly from women, which I understand. But basically, what they're saying to me is, look, men have all the power and privilege in the world. Why are we worried about their problems? But we still have a long way to go before we have the luxury of worrying about men's problems. We should just be worrying about the people who are in the bottom of the ladder, which is women. It's a totally legitimate point. Here's my reply: we're all on a boat together, and the boat is sinking. We're all going to drown. Now, you're absolutely right. Men designed the boat, men built the boat, and men get all the benefits from the way the boat is designed and built, but they're going to drown right along with you.
Mhm.
Everybody's going to drown together. If we don't stop arguing about who's to blame and start realizing we're all crippled by the same system, men as well as women,
Mhm.
and it's in all of our best interest to do things differently.
And I don't think I mean, yes, we've had to go through eras where women had to, the power to vote, to be able to go out and work and still raise their family, and we're in a lot of these jobs where we're getting the same or equal pay, but I feel like that is taken away from the dynamics of, like, I don't know. I don't think, like, we still need our men. Men are still men and they're still out there. There's still differences between us, but as you said, it's learned differences and stuff. I feel in this country that we don't, I don't know. I don't know. There was something that you said there where I know that you might get a lot of grief for your book because a lot of women are about like done with the patriarchy and all that, and women are like, oh, we need to be equal and all that stuff. Whereas in this country, really, women are allowed to be whoever they want to be. They can raise a family, they can work a job. Whereas there's other countries where women have zero rights at all, and they have to stay in the home, and they have to wear this garment over them where they'll be punished if even a quarter inch is being shown of their ankles or something. So I find in our country that we are so lucky. I mean, yes, there's emotional differences, but I'm grateful for a book like yours that can allow us to take responsibility how we're showing up for the men in our lives and be able to show us how men might be afraid instead of being just distant or not caring and such stuff
Yeah.
like that.
There are definitely other countries where women have less fullness of life, less power, less privilege, and there are countries where women have a great deal more than we do, where women
Mhm.
are more equally in positions of power,
Yes,
leadership, running companies, elected to office. We still have a very, very
I agree.
small percentage of women in those positions. So we still have a long way to go.
Yes. Yes.
And this is about patriarchy.
Mhm.
It is an overtly feminist book. And the point I'm making, though, is patriarchy damages men, even though men created patriarchy.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yes.
it damages men and it damages women. It's not
Mm.
just women who are damaged by patriarchy. And so it's in all of our best interests to revision that.
So, has anything surprised you in the process of researching or working with couples around these issues?
A lot has surprised me.
Mm.
A lot has surprised me. The biggest one was when I did my first men's group, which was about 15 years ago. I remember standing outside the door and thinking, this is the worst decision I've ever made as a professional. This is going to be horrible. It's this group of men. So I've been doing mixed groups for decades, but I had never done a group of just men. And I thought, they're not going to do anything. They're going to sit and stare at each other, or they'll talk about work, or they'll talk about sports, but they're not going to really talk in a very personal. Well, the end of the first group, everybody's up hugging. Second or third group, people are talking about how much they care about each other and how important the group is to them. And I'm like, this is men? Well, it was, I'm embarrassed to say, I learned a lot about how men are unlike how you think they are when you put them in a safe space that encourages them to be more open and vulnerable. They are like starving
Mhm.
for that and take to it. So this first group that I did changed the day of the week we meet in order to be able to meet 3 times more a year so that they're devoted to this. They're so happy to have found a place where they can talk openly with other men means everything to them.
Mhm.
So that's the biggest surprise is I really didn't know that men were like that.
Mhm. And you see a lot of this in men's group, and, one example is, like, the 12-step program where they have their groups and they're working through their addictions, or even after they've gotten through their major struggles, they sit in group and they support each other and they talk about everything
Yeah,
together, so you see a lot of it. And I do know a lot of men's groups that are showing up where they're talking about these things and how
absolutely.
to relate with women. It's such a beautiful thing to see.
Again, if you accept the premise that men have the same emotional needs that women do,
Yeah.
and then you look at how fewer resources men have, you realize
Yep.
how much they're hurting,
Yes, and the stereotypes that are involved
right?
in relationship to men.
And, the deal we've made with men is we'll give you power and privilege, but you don't get closeness and intimacy. And
Mhm.
men have been gone along with that for generations,
Yes.
but men are finally saying, that's a crappy deal. I'm getting the short end of the stick in this.
Yeah.
I want to rethink this. I don't want just one. I
Mhm.
want both.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, hallelujah.
Yes.
Exactly. It's only good for everyone. It's certainly good for
Mhm.
children,
Yes.
to be raised with two parents instead of one. It's certainly good for women to have an available, intimate, connected partner instead of an aloof, detached, visitor in the home. And it's God, it's good for men because men are suffering in so many ways. It's popular in the press these days after, I guess, Richard Reeves was his name, wrote a book about, how men are doing in the world, which was a New York Times bestseller. And, they're falling behind in every aspect of the world. They don't live as long. They're
Mhm.
unhappy. They're, across the board. In most professions now are becoming, except for business, are become, colleges, overwhelmingly women, graduate schools, even more, most professional settings. I supervise for an agency, and there are like 25 therapists in the group. There are no men, not one.
And I know I've read that men are more there was a survey about how men are more happy in relationships and they live longer, but women are more happy being single and out of relationship.
Yes. Uh, Partnered men are happier, healthier, and wealthier
Mm,
than single men, and single women are happier, healthier, and wealthier, which is bizarre because the myth we have is that it's
fairy
women
tale.
who want to get married and men
Yes.
who resist it, but it's men who benefit from marriage, which is again why they're the ones to start dating right away
Mhm.
because they're the ones who are making out in the relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. And everyone thinks, "Oh, they're dating right away because they don't care and they're just cold and they
Oh, good.
never cared." It's not because they need women. They need
What
that.
typically happens is a guy gets divorced thinking because women provide the scaffolding in a family. You're so adept at it that you do it without it being noticed.
Mhm.
And so when men think about divorce and they think, oh, I'm going to have the same life I have now, just without her in it. And then they don't realize how much it's interconnected and that they don't have any friends, that they're her friends.
Mhm.
They don't have any connection in the community. She did all that work. They didn't know anybody at the synagogue. She knows people at the it's like it's a rude awakening when they divorce, and it's like, "Oh, I really haven't been paying attention to any personal aspect of my life at all. I've just been." People who have a spouse who stays at home make 50% more than people who have a spouse that works, male or female, gender doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So you know, women typically are doing so much to support men that they don't even realize, and then they divorce and they're like, "Uh-oh," you know?
So yeah, some of those old dynamics really work. It is supporting. You have someone, you know, somebody's at home taking care of the family and the household, which is one of the most important jobs I feel that you can ever have. And now you've got the two people out there and working, and then the home life falls apart a little bit. So, and I think
Certainly,
that's probably why there's a lot of divorces.
yeah. I mean, it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's a really hard thing that we ask young families to do to
Yeah.
be at work all day. And not only just young families, the hard thing we ask kids to do. Because again, when I visit my grandchildren and I see how tired they are when they come home after a full day of school, which is kindergarten, it's not,
Oh my God.
but they're exhausted and
Yeah.
they just want to, cuddle with their parents with a,
Yeah.
but mom and dad have been working all day. And it's like, I see how hard they have to work to bring the emotional energy for their family. And then the kids go to bed and they're exhausted.
Hmm.
I'm exhausted after an hour in their home. I'm exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah, because well, I don't have children, but my mom's in memory care and just my attention is so focused on her. It's exhausting. Like I'm exhausted. Like I don't have the energy half the time.
And you get to leave and go home,
Yes, I get to go home.
right?
Yes. Yes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't do this
And if your
full
mom were
time.
living with you.
Yeah, no, it's just all consuming.
Yeah.
And I enjoy my time with her and we have wonderful time just like if I had yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And we're pretty guilty as a society about not providing much support.
Mhm.
We don't make affordable daycare available, a whole range of problems
Yeah.
that we don't make. People have a family member in something like memory care. We don't provide leave from work. I mean, all kinds of things that we could do to make it a little I live on an island, live in a very small community. Friends of mine were in the hospital. He was in the hospital for 10 days. When they got off the ferry, there were a group of us waiting at the ferry with welcome home signs. Some of us went to their home, carried wood inside, lit the
I
fire.
love
Other
that.
people had made food. There's like an entire
A
mob
community, yeah.
on them. That they won't cook a meal for a month.
Mhm. And that's another thing is that we don't really have nowadays, and I think a lot of people are gravitating more towards is the sense of community. How you and living on an island sounds fantastic because I mean, I live in a condo community. I don't know my neighbors. I
Right.
don't know anyone. There's no support there.
Yeah, it's
Takes a
unfortunate.
village. It
Well,
takes a
like,
village.
everybody's I always think this when I'm in a hotel, I'm, like, walking around the hotel and everybody's behind their door watching the same damn shows, it's like,
Yeah.
put a TV in the lobby,
Yeah.
maybe people would come and sit and,
We're all in our little boxes.
yeah, yeah, and not happy with it. That's the thing, if people were happy, I'd say, "Okay, fine." But, more and more people are moving back to small towns,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's for this reason, is that, there are people moving to this island all the time, and they see the community here, and they wanna feel a part. I can't
Mhm.
go down to the post office. It's an hour trip. It's
Wow.
5 minutes away. I'm sorry, it's 5 minutes away.
Okay.
But by the time I finish talking to
Ah, that's funny. I love that. I
takes
love that. I think after what happened over the last couple of years where we saw, like, there was such isolation and there was so much division happening, or they were trying to, and seeing all the interference, that people have wanted to have feel them gravitating more towards community now, because if they had to sustain themselves and live outside the system and live holistically or live however they want to, you need these communities. So it's so important to have that, and we've become so disassociated from it.
loneliness is a bigger health risk, is bigger contributor to early mortality than smoking cigarettes.
Mm,
If you had to choose between the
really?
2,
Wow.
yes, you had to choose between the 2, you'd live longer smoking cigarettes and having close friends than you would not smoking cigarettes and not having.
Yeah, you definitely need friends because it can be stress. Or you could have the nicotine without all the additives in it, because I'm hearing so many great things about nicotine lately. Yeah. So this has been such a really enlightening conversation. I'm
Good,
sure for my audience members and for myself especially, I'm going to take that with me for sure.
good.
S- So what just a few more questions before we go. I'd love to know what you hope couples will take away from this conversation.
I hope what they would take away is an openness to a new way of thinking about what's getting in the way in their relationship and considering the possibility that it's about men being afraid and that the next time they're in a tough spot together that they remember that and see if thinking about that doesn't help.
Mhm. I don't see how it can't with understanding that their man is afraid. It's the nurturing in us as women
I'm
and
being
then instantly softening our approach at that point.
yeah, therapists don't give guarantees, but this one's pretty close to a guarantee.
Mhm.
No question about it.
Because we
And
never
think
want.
about reading the book together. Think about if you're interested in the book, think about reading it together, a chapter at a time, because it's a great conversation starter.
Mhm. Well, I think that's great advice, and for anybody that's in a couple, in a relationship, looking to be in a relationships, in dating, hoping to get into a relationship, I think this is a book wonderful book for people to have, whether they're a couple or single looking to be in a relationship. So I'd love for my audience to know, where can people learn more about your work and how can they connect with you?
Simple. Go to my website, which is avrumweissphd.com. I assume it'll be in your show notes. And it is a point of personal pride for me that I return every email I've ever received within
Wow.
24. So if you don't get a reply from me, it's because I didn't get your email or I'm in the hospital, something horrible happened. But I reply to every email I get. You can ask me a question. You can also there access, if you sign up for my mailing list, you'll get all the stuff I write for Psychology Today, and you'll get a free ebook on relationships.
Okay, I'm going to put all that in the show notes. I'm going to sign up for that myself. And one more question before we go. I'd love for you to tell me, or not tell me. I'd love to hear from you what it means for you to live with an awakened heart.
I would not be interested in living otherwise.
Mm,
I don't, everybody has things they understand easily and things they don't get. I don't get when people lead with protecting their hearts.
mhm.
I really don't understand that approach to life. They're so scared about being hurt that they are almost guaranteeing that they'll never love, that they'll never feel joy, that they'll never. And so I'm like, when somebody does something crappy to me, I'm like, all right, that's just, so one time out of 100, somebody did something crappy. And the other 99 times, I had a lovely interaction with that person. So it just comes with the territory. People are going to hurt you, sometimes in simple ways and sometimes profoundly awful ways. But that's the choice, is either having an open heart, an awakened heart, or being stoic and alone and
Mm,
miserable. So I don't understand life without that.
It's so simple. So simple. Yeah.
It's not easy. I always like to say it's simple
Right.
and easy.
Right.
Stuff we're talking about really is kind of simple. And then
Yes.
people think, oh, I'm a dummy because I don't get it. No, it's simple. It's just hard to do.
Right. It's like, how can I not? That's just really
Take,
impactful.
as my teacher used to say, took a series of relationships to get you into this mess. It's going to take a series of relationships to get you. It's not just like, oh, I read the book, now I'm better. I mean, it took a
Mhm.
while to get this confused. It's going to take a while to sort it out.
Mhm.
So be patient, gentle,
Yes. Yes, and there's learning to do within,
always.
definitely. Yeah, always.
Always.
Always. Well, Avram, thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
joining me today. And I hope everybody listening gets this book, Men and Women. It'll help with your dynamics. It'll help you with your relationship with yourself. And I think what you're doing is such important work because I don't hear that often that, oh, men are afraid of women. And I can see how it can be met with so much resistance from men just hearing it. But when they really let it sink in, it's like, oh, okay, I am.
I hope it's an idea that you will hear more often. I hope the idea will
Mhm.
spread. People will get it. And because I don't like to see people suffer. So
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
my pleasure. Enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awaken Heart podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at theawakenheartpodcast.com.